Hey there. So, as you know, I like to dress up for these things. Like the time when I dressed up like an insect. And there was one time, but you guys don't always know when I'm dressing up. I know I haven't done a lot. Today was going to be the day. I was going to wear scuba gear, but I don't have any scuba gear. I don't know why I didn't think of that ahead of time. All I could find, I looked through, I was like, I know I have stuff around the house because, like, I had like glasses. I put water in the glasses. That's not very good. I did find these things. I don't know. I apologize. That's all I have. Anyway, we're talking about whales. That's right. It's time for a little whale song. This is Animal Music, lecture number X. If you're Roman, by me, your host. I'm not Roman. I am David M. Bashwinner, professor of music at the University of New Mexico. That guy there is a whale. That's another one. Here's a little overview. Like many of my overviews, this one is mostly a lie. What is a whale? We are going to talk about that. And do whales sing? Yeah. And we will talk a little bit about whale song structure, but we're not really going to talk about why they sing. You're going to do some reading on that. And then this outro, the aquatic ape theory, how humans might be like whales. Going to talk about that either, but it's really fascinating, and I will do a reading later in the semester. It's just like too good, Cool. I'm glad you understand. What is a whale? Whales are mammals. Hey, that's not nice. If you didn't know that, it's okay. A lot of people get confused. So before Darwin, it was assumed that the relatedness of animals should be accounted for based on their characteristics. But this doesn't always work. Birds, bats, and insects all have wings, right? They're not really closely related. Birds and mammals are both warm-blooded, but they're not closely related. They're related through reptiles, and reptiles are not warm-blooded. Primates climb trees, and so do some frogs and lots of other animals, but primates and frogs are not closely related. Penguins, whales, fish, and jellyfish all swim. They're all pretty different from one another, all different families: birds, mammals, fish, invertebrates. Platypuses have bills and lay eggs, but they also have hair and, am I going to say this word? Is this a cuss word? No. It's a part of the platypus body. Although, if there are any underage platypuses out there, well, I guess it's too late. Okay. Grandparents resemble other people, their age, more than they resemble their grandchildren, right? So all of those things suggest you can't really just base relatedness off of superficial similarities. Therefore, one has to look at evolutionary descent. You might superficially resemble your friends, but genetically you most resemble your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, etc. Evolutionary relatedness tells you not what a certain characteristic is, but how it came to be. This also gives you clues to its function, because it came to be that way because it was useful. Now, if we talk about a flipper or a mouth or an eye, anything like that, it makes sense that we would want to do this, think about the function of a flipper that leads it to look the way it is. But when you're talking about music or something cognitive, speech, say, social skills, this is where the evolutionary perspective is not super obvious, but it can be very valuable. So you can therefore look at a trait like singing, and you can ask, how does song function in this species? With humans, we always pretty much assume that music is something that we just choose to do, that it's purely aesthetic, that there's no function to it. And when people try to come up with functions for it, those explanations are really, they sometimes sound a little bit like Aesop's fables, like how did the leopard get its spots? So that is a real danger of trying to think too much about, or trying to read too much into what could have been evolutionarily. But this kind of thinking is very important. If you want to think about the biology of human musicality at all, you do have to pretty much take this stuff into consideration. I would also like to point out that it is possible for certain traits to be non-functional, to sort of have arrived by accident. But this isn't super common. It's one of the theories that explains how music came to be. So since people can have brain damage and in one certain area and they lose musical ability, but they don't lose linguistic ability or ability to hear other things generally. So that is evidence that there's something about the human brain that is specifically musical, right? There aren't like individual regions that are music regions, but basically it's sort of like that. It's just light, a lighter version of that. Okay, so since there really is, you can say there definitely is biological grounding to there being musicality in the human brain, but you don't necessarily know how it got there. And one of the theories is that humans evolved for language, and language tends to be more on the left side, a little bit on the right side of the brain. Music then, by accident, came along for the ride. In the same way that, let's say, we evolved to have strong right hands, and our left hand is just because it's the opposite side of the body also made a strong left hand, but most people don't use it. I mean, I happen to use it, but other people I hear don't. So anyway, whales, they might appear to us to look and act like fish, but they are no more closely related to actual fish than we are. To understand what whale song means, therefore, we are going to look into how it functions, and we figure out how it functions based on how we think it may have evolved. Still a difficult question. We don't necessarily know the answer, but we can hopefully learn something about whale song by trying to figure out why whales sing. And then, like I said, we're not actually going to talk that much in this presentation about that, but you will be doing that for your weekend journal exercise. So we know a whale is a mammal, but what kind of mammal is a whale? It's a big mammal, and it's a handsome mammal. Duh. Okay. Got it. Thanks. Whales are cetaceans. Could have said that, Mr. Humpback Whale. The cetaceans include all the whales and the dolphins. Dolphins are technically whales. I know we don't think of them, we kind of say whales and dolphins, but dolphins are whales. In the same way that birds are reptiles. We think of birds as being different, but if you define reptiles by common descent, then birds are basically dinosaurs. Birds and dinosaurs are all reptiles. Cetaceans derived from a common ancestor around 52 million years ago called Pakicetus. We'll see a picture of him on the next page. Pakicetus looked like a medium-sized dog with hoofed feet and had an average-sized brain. Descendants of Pakicetus branched off into two groups around 35 million years ago. As the brain of this animal became larger and more complex, or these animals. These two groups are the Odontocetes, that means toothed whales, and these are dolphins. I'll call all these dolphin types. Dolphins, porpoises look just like dolphins. Belugas look like, I think they look more like whales, and sperm whales definitely look like whales, but they're within that same group. And then another one that's in there is killer whales. They should be in with Odontocetes. That just means they have teeth, but what's important is that it's just a different group, and they echolocate, whereas the other ones, the ones we're mostly talking about today, the Mysticetes, don't echolocate. The Mysticetes are filter feeders, also called baleen whales, and examples are humpback, which we talk about mostly today, and then blue whale and bowhead. Oh yeah, the thing about baleen is it's like a filter system in the mouth, sort of like imagine a whole bunch of big old toothbrushes instead of teeth. So you bring in water and then you spit out the water through your teeth, but then the fish stay inside. Complexity of the whale brain has remained static over the last 15 million years. So whales went through massive evolutionary change from 52 to about 15 million years ago. And it's important to think about, when did they get super smart? Was it more than 52 million years ago? Was it around 35 million years ago? Was it 15 million years ago? Have they kept getting smarter to the present day? It seems like their brains seem not to have changed much in the last 15 million years. So, and they didn't apparently start super intelligent, just based on the size of the brain relative to the size of the body. So what that means is somewhere around the 35 million years ago, and both groups of whales are very intelligent. So somewhere around there, probably before 35 million years ago, became much more intelligent, having a much larger brain relative to body size. Okay, where did Pakicetus come from 52 million years ago? Dun, 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 dun. Pakicetus was an ungulate. That means it's got hoofs on its feet, and there's two-toed and three-toed, or two-toed and one-toed. Anyway, odd and even-toed ungulates. Yeah, I think it's 1 and 2. So anyway, two-toed ungulate, which we'll see. Yes, they are here. Even-toed ungulates are pigs, cows, goats, sheep, deer, giraffes, camels, hippopotamuses, and whales. Which one of those doesn't have feet? Aha! So you might not have guessed that whales were ungulates, but they are. Those are all. That group is found among the Laurasiatheria, and we'll look at that chart from last week to look where they are relative to other mammals. But lastly, whales and dolphins today are therefore still considered to be ungulates, even though they obviously no longer have hooves on their feet. Yes, yeah, super handsome. Okay, let's go. Radiation of mammals. Mammals around 200 million years ago. So where we're looking for is 52 million years ago, right? That's how we get to Pakicetus. But we're taking mammals from last week. Yeah, they get hair and fur at least by around 165 million years ago. You get the platypuses and echidnas, right? Platypus has a beak and lays eggs. 125 million years ago. At around the same time, you get marsupials, kangaroos, koalas, opossums. And then everybody else are the placental mammals. So monotremes lay eggs, marsupials have the little fetuses inside their pouch, outside the body, and the placentals have the babies inside the womb, inside the belly. Okay, so of all these placentals, there's a couple of different groups. There's 3 groups, actually. The Afrotheria, we saw these last week, elephants, elephant shrews, manatees, aardvarks. Xenarthra, which are the armadillos, anteaters, and sloths. And then the sort of main group, which is Boreoeutheria. And among that group, there's 2 subdivisions, the Archontoglyphs, which include the tree shrews, the primates, that's us, rabbits and rodents, and then the other side, which is Laurasiatheria, whales, bats, dogs, cats, seals, ungulates. So you see at the upper right, well, a bat, there should be a whale there. Hey, nice. Okay, good job, just in time. Maybe a little bit earlier next time, buddy. Okay, just kidding. Laurasiatheria. I know on the last screen I said that placental mammals are 70-something million years ago, but it's really just, roughly. It depends on how you count, basically. So the elephants, manatees, elephant shrews, blah, 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 the armadillos, anteater sloths, we saw that on the previous screen. And then for the Boreoeutheria, around 100 million years ago, this is the groups we were looking at the top of the last screen. These guys divide into tree shrews, primates, rabbits, rodents, that's us. And so we branched off separately from the Laurasiatheria. This is what we saw at the top right. Laurasiatheria were at the top right of the previous page. And that's 80 million years ago. We need to get up to 52 million years ago. So what happens between then? The Laurasiatheria become Eulipotifila. No idea how to say it. Hedgehogs, shrews, moles, solenodons. Don't know what that is. Chiroptera, the bats and the flying foxes, which we looked at last week. Carnivores, cats, dogs, seals, and then the ungulates. Now, like I said, there's odd-toed and even-toed ungulates. And then the even-toed ungulates, I think, are in existence about 53 million years ago. So that is 1 million years ago before what we're looking for Pakicetus. Pakicetus being an early ancestor of whales. Okay, so the even-toed ungulates divide into 2 groups. There's the pig type group, which are the entelodonts, and you can see a little picture there. It looks like a boar or something like that. Look at the hoofs in particular, right? They got the two hoofed toes at the front, but everything else is kind of pig-like. And then another division of the even-toed around that time, the other division were the whippomorphs. And I know you're thinking I've never heard that term before. If you're me, because I had never heard it before. But it's not as weird as it sounds. It's whales and hippos, so W-H-A-L-E, W-H-A-L-E, H-I-P-P-O. You combine those, sort of like, those couples. Anyway, the whales and the hippos become the whippos. Around 4, that can't be, man, because we're talking about 52. Anyway, maybe that number is wrong. Oh, no, it's not wrong. It's just they become hippo type around 40 million years ago, but we're looking at them at around 52 million years ago, before there's a distinction between whales and hippos. Much of one. Okay, so, the hippo type is on the right, and that's about 40 million years ago. So we're looking at an animal that's a little bit before that hippo type thing, But whatever, a little bit more pig-like, and we're going to see it on the next screen. And it is called Pakicetus. Hey, how come primates aren't at the top? Oh yeah, where are the primates? They are, over on the left under the Euarchontoglires, trees, shrews, primates, rabbits, rodents. Yeah, why aren't they at the top? Oh. Okay, got it. Well, evolution, or devolution, readapting to the life aquatic. So what you have here is Pakicetus, and as we know, Pakicetus is a mammal, and mammals came from reptiliomorphs, which came from amphibians, which came from fish. So mammals like once were fish in their heritage a long time ago, and then what we're going to see is this mammal going back to a fish-like existence, and there's important differences, but it is kind of look like a big fish. That's why people think whales, are just big fish. But they're not. Very different. They're mammals. So you first have Pakicetus, then you have Ambulocetus from just a little bit later, and you can see Ambulocetus, we're going to look in more detail in the next couple screens, but Ambulocetus already looks a little bit more like either like he's flying, but he's not. He's swimming, or she. Remingtonocetus has a fancy name. Definitely underwater there. The feet are getting smaller, the tail's getting longer. Here we go with Rodhocetus. Looks more like a whale type thing. Bigger head, bigger body. Feet look a little bit more like fins. Then you have Protocetus. Clearly looks very dolphin-like. You got a little fluke at the end of the tail. It still has arms and legs, right? But look how tiny they are. They are tiny, tiny, tiny. It's got a long snout. The blowhole is sort of more toward the top of the head instead of at the front. And it's around that time, around 35 million years ago, where they're about to divide, that echolocation does come into existence, and filter feeding. And that's going to distinguish between these two groups. So somewhere between 26 and 17 million years ago, you get this division, you get the actual split into Squalodon, which is an odontocete, right, toothed whale type thing, which is like a dolphin. And then at the bottom, a Mysticete, the Echolocation, around 27 million years ago. Whatever, don't worry about the dates so much, but you get the division into the toothed whales on top and the baleen filter feeder whales on the bottom. And then you can just see that the Squalodon ends up being even more dolphin-like when it gets to Kentriodon. And then the filter feeder below the Mysticete looks even more whale-like, Cetotherium at the bottom there. So it is, it's by around that time that the dolphin-type whales are looking a lot like dolphins, and the whale-type whales are looking a lot like whales. Okay, that's what happens after Pakicetus, after 50 million years ago. And then we said that we don't think that the cetaceans changed all that much in the last 15 million years. So I don't know to what extent they kept speciating into the different varieties. We can think of them as being mostly fully formed as Odontocetes in the Kentriodon line and Mysticetes in the Cetotherium line. So Pakicetus. Let's go into a little bit more detail. Who is Pakicetus and who was Ambulocetus that comes after him? Pakicetus, 49 to 48 million years ago. This organism, like fossils of it, are discovered in the northern Pakistan region. It lived near fresh water. So this is, I didn't know this was even important or interesting, but now I do. So I'm telling you, you might find it important and interesting. The animal has to go back not only from land to water, but it has to go from having to drink fresh water as a land animal to being able to swim and survive and get enough water from salt water. So those things have to change in the body as well. I didn't realize it. So this one is still living near fresh water. It's probably capturing land animals that are coming to the water to drink. And it's probably capturing freshwater aquatic organisms like fish and invertebrates. It didn't have a blowhole yet, as you can see, right? It looks kind of like a dog. It's got its nose at the front. It doesn't have an enlarged mandibular foramen. What's that? Oh, it's at the top right. That's a jawbone. That looks like a human type animal. I actually know what kind it is. But that little hole there that's circled, it's not super important. But basically that thing fills up with fat and gets really big. And it's used to hear high frequencies in the diving mammals. So it is interesting. It means that Pakicetus was not yet hearing in ultrasound. No blowhole, no enlarged mandibular foramen filled with fluid or fat. It had a mandibular foramen, like all mammals, presumably, but it wasn't enlarged and filled with fluid or fat. And so its ears, we can assume, were still specialized for hearing on land, not underwater. It had upward-facing eyes, which I really love. So kind of like a crocodile. And I hadn't thought of this, but I mean, I didn't know it. Yeah, anyway. So this way it can submerge itself underwater like a crocodile does with eyes above its head. And then when animals come to the water to drink, it goes and catches them. So it's like a furry crocodile, you can think. It had dense bones. I like that one too. To hold it underwater, basically. And then whales end up having dense bones as well to keep them underwater. So it definitely was living in the water, but otherwise it was a mammal, breathing air, hearing in the air, seeing mostly in air, even though it had those upward-facing eyes. And they weren't good swimmers. You could see by their feet, they look like they're walking on, those feet are made for walking. They were poor swimmers. They didn't have any aquatic skeletal adaptations, and they were good runners and jumpers. Now we get to Ambulocetus, so like around almost exactly the same time, but they kind of think next in the evolutionary sequence, also from the same general place, Middle East, Pakistan. This animal, they can tell by looking at like the content of, what's in its bones when they find these fossils. It was drinking some fresh water, and it was at least eating some organisms that were from saltwater. Okay, so that means that animal is not just living near rivers and streams, but is also living near or in the ocean, but still it's got to drink fresh water probably still. Okay, so it has a slightly increased mandibular foramen, filled with fat, presumably. In modern Odontocetes, this extends all the way to the middle ear, which allows them to hear with their jaw, as with the Weberian ossicles in fish, which we saw. So what this means is Ambulocetus is at least slightly getting better at hearing underwater, and maybe this is in the ultrasound range. I'm not sure where that, if that's what's happening. I think it's probably not, but at least it can hear better in water because of the mandibular foramen filled with fat. And then its eye orbits are still facing up, but they are slightly more lateral than they are in Pakicetus. So that means it might be spending more time underwater looking for things underwater as opposed to things above the water. It has strong hind legs and a tail, but it probably wasn't good at running and jumping on land like Pakicetus was. So Pakicetus was probably good like a dog at running around like that, whereas Ambulocetus would be awkward, a bit more like a seal is pretty awkward on land. Okay, and it swam by way of pelvic paddling, using the hind legs to generate propulsion, and some caudal undulation of the vertebral column. Okay, so, I think... So, okay, I'm guessing pelvic paddling is using the feet, kind of like, maybe like we do, like doggy style swimming. So I guess that's called dog paddle, isn't it? Yeah. So, and then caudal undulation is presumably, so caudal is tail, right? And they have a tail, but they're swimming with their spine. So this is, I mentioned this before, but this is a fundamental difference. The way dolphins and whales, and I think seals and other diving mammals swim is like this. And that's because mammals go through this phase where reptiles are can only drag their bellies on the ground and they can't move their body in this way. Whereas mammals end up having a more erect posture, right? If they're on the ground. And so mammals stand like that with an arched back. Whereas I think that reptiles and fish can't do this very well. Fish swim side to side. See, don't I look like a fish? How about this? Whereas dolphins and whales swim like this. Okay, fundamental difference. And so that would be caudal undulation. And we're going to make one little distinction, which is that caudal undulation and caudal oscillation are slightly different. I don't know, frankly, what the difference is, but modern cetaceans, we know, swim through caudal oscillation as opposed to undulation. It's related to, but it's not identical. So it's probably just a more, I don't know, it's more something. That definitely means Ambulocetus was spending a lot more time in water than on land. And yeah, it was probably swimming underwater and looking for things underwater as opposed to just looking for land animals coming to the water. So already after just a couple million years, or toward the beginning, it's evolving within a couple million years the ability to be a water animal. I mean, it's very fast, it seems like. So we'll just go briefly through these other stages. This is 100% only because I find this interesting. I'm super curious about how whales came to be from land animals. So if you don't like it, that's cool. Remingtonocetus, 45 million years ago, lived in South Asia, India, and Pakistan. So still same general region. It was more aquatic even than Ambulocetus. It had no dependence on freshwater habitat, so it could get all its food, and it seems to have been able to get drinking water from the saltwater sea. Okay, it had small eyes, and they're facing laterally now. So they're small, so it probably doesn't care that much about what it's seeing. But in any event, that they're facing laterally, so it's not getting things from above the surface, it's getting its food from underwater. Its nostrils were still at the tip of the snout, so that it is kind of like a crocodile or a dog. It's not yet like what a whale or dolphin will be like. It has semicircular canals. Oh, those are reduced in size. That just suggests that it was not spending much time on land. It has shorter limbs, as you can see. These are shorter than Ambulocetus. It was probably swimming through caudal undulation, like we said before, and it wasn't doing the doggy paddle. It was just doing the caudal undulation. It did have an enlarged mandibular foramen for hearing underwater. And now let's look at an animal that comes just a little bit afterward. 40 million years ago, Protocetus is the one that first looks like a dolphin. It's got a fluke on its tail, right? So it's amphibious, and that's pretty interesting. I don't know if presumably the same with Remingtonocetus as well. But anyway, this one is still dependent on land to some extent because it was giving birth on land. I have no idea how they know that, but they know it. So even though it's swimming in the water, it's going to land to give birth. Turtles are like that. There's other reptiles that are like that spend most of their time in the sea, but as adults. But then when they give birth, they bring the eggs back to land. Okay, these guys, Protocetus, had large lateral facing eyes, and those are similar to modern cetaceans. So I guess modern cetaceans do have large eyes. Remingtonocetus before had the lateral facing eyes, but it had small eyes. Protocetus has large nasal openings that are halfway up the snout. So it's like halfway between nostrils and a blowhole. And blowhole is the same thing as nostrils, right? They're homologous. But the blowhole migrates over the course of this whole period from the front of the nose that you would use on land to the top of the head that you would use if you're a water animal. So it did have a larger mandibular foramen, but apparently it didn't yet have air-filled sinuses, and I can't say I know exactly how modern cetaceans use those, but in any event, they're still not hearing like modern cetaceans would be. The ear canal is still present that animals have when they're living on land, and modern cetaceans don't have an ear canal, as I think. So this Protocetus animal is no longer great at hearing on land, but it's not yet as great as modern cetaceans at hearing in water. It's sort of in between. It has shorter limbs still. It has little tiny like fake front legs and back legs that are even smaller than Remingtonocetus's, and then Remingtonocetus had smaller legs than Ambulocetus, right? And Ambulocetus had water-type legs compared to Pakicetus. So we see the limbs shrinking. And in that picture, there's a fluke on the tail that's like, I don't know what you call the tail fin or whatever. So presumably, they think it had a fluke on the tail, which is just going to help it swim more specifically in the way that I was talking about, the caudal undulation way. In mammals, including us, our sacrum is like a fusion of 5 bones. But in Protocetus, they end up being unfused, so that allows for like a longer tail, again, longer tail section. And then eventually they're going to become separated from the pelvis in the whales, but here they're still connected to the pelvis as they are in land animals like us. And we can't see it in the picture, but if you looked at the end of those little like fin-like hands and feet, they still had hooves at the end of the little hands and feet, kind of like we have like little fingernails. I think that's pretty fascinating. And apparently was still using pelvic paddling and caudal undulation. Okay, next we have the Basilosaurids and Durodontids. These weren't on our original picture, but it's fine that they're the step just before we get to modern Mysticetes and Odontocetes. So you got the Basilosaurids. They really look like whales. Now, they ate fish. We know that. We know what their diet was. We know that they were fully marine. They didn't ever have to go out to streams or ponds to get fresh water. They could get all their water from the marine environment they're living in, the saltwater environment. They were living throughout the world, so now they're no longer just in the Pakistan, India region. They're at least throughout the whole southern hemisphere. They don't have a melon. We're going to see what that is. Actually, no, we don't see it here. A melon is at the top of the forehead that allows them to project outward their ultrasonic frequencies used in echolocation. So these animals, Basilosaurids, were presumably not echolocating yet. They had small brains. So at 40 million years ago, the brains are still pretty small of these animals. And they were solitary, so they didn't yet have complex social structures. And as we know, complex social structure goes hand in hand with having a larger brain. The modern whales are super social and super intelligent. So these guys were not yet, presumably, not yet terribly intelligent, not yet super social, not yet using ultrasound, but they're now living all over the world and they don't have to ever leave the salt water. But then they were probably detecting sound quite well because they did have a fully enlarged mandibular foramen. Their nostrils are higher up on their snout. And I guess they're either close to or they're actually at the modern location of the blowhole in modern cetaceans. And they apparently have fully modern ears with the air-filled sinuses between the ear and the skull. So maybe we have to go back and say we're pretty sure they weren't making ultrasonic frequencies, because they didn't have a melon that allows them to project those better, which we'll talk about on a later screen. But their hearing appears at this point to be very good. But weirdly, they still have a large external ear, which modern cetaceans don't have. And they're super big. They're up to 60 feet long. And part of that is I've always wondered about this, like, do they get extra vertebrae or do they just have really long vertebrae? And at least in this case, that they had just each of the vertebrae just were a lot longer. And finally, they swam through caudal undulation. The fluke they seem to have present, but I don't know why these authors think that they would have had a fluke and not used it for propulsion, but apparently they didn't. So modern cetaceans do, these ones don't. Their forelimbs, little tiny forelimbs, you can't even see them in the picture, but they were flipper-shaped with finger joints. They still had little finger-type joints that were flexible, and that was the same as with Ambulocetus. So it's like their arms and legs haven't yet fully become just plain old fins yet. And then they have pelvic bones, and these pelvic bones are now no longer connected to the vertebra. The sacral vertebrae are not fused anymore. They're not connected to the pelvis, so you actually can't tell the difference between the vertebra of the sacrum and those that are just the other vertebra in the animal. And then around the same time, you get the Durodontids. Durodontids might be a little bit closer to modern-day cetaceans, but anyway, they're still at around the same time. These are similar to the Basilosaurids, but more closely related to the modern-day cetaceans. These guys are smaller in size, and they had a powerful vertebral column for swimming, probably using their fluke to produce caudal oscillations. So we're now at caudal oscillations as opposed to caudal undulations. And they are using the fluke. So Basilosaurids had the fluke, but apparently weren't using it all that much. Okay, just a little picture of a dolphin head. The melon is in orange. It's like where the forehead would be. I think I read that it's part of the nose, actually. So it's homologous with the nose. But it's a fat-filled thing in the forehead. The sounds are being made back here in the phonic lips, and then you can see they're projecting, so the sound is going to go in all directions, right? But here it's allowed to go through the melon and then bounce off and go that way. Here they're allowed to go that way and then bounce this way through the melon, And then here, there's one more to go that way and bounce this way through the melon. And the melon just helps project them. If I understood more about that, I would tell you, but I don't. So the animal is pushing sound up through this way, vibrating the phonic lips. And then this is where air comes out. And this is the lower jaw, so the mandible. So there's going to be a mandibular foramen, like a thing in here that gets filled with fat and makes it better at picking up sound underwater and perhaps specifically ultrasound. So finally, who are the Mysticetes and the Odontocetes? Around 30 million years ago, you get the Mysticetes. This is an example we saw previously, Cetotherium from 18 million years ago. This is the whale type whales. These guys are filter feeders. They have baleen instead of teeth that allows them to bring water into their mouth, and then they squish out the water, but then they keep the fish. Humpback whale is an example of the Mysticete. A right whale, the minke whale, gray whale, and the blue whales. All of these guys are Mysticetes. Odontocetes are the ones that we think of as being mostly like dolphins. Squalodon is an example of that, and then Kentriodon. Right? Kentriodon looks very dolphin-like. Squalodon looks almost dolphin-like. And Squalodon's a little bit earlier in time, I think. So these guys are the toothed whales. Right around this time, like today, Mysticetes do not echolocate and Odontocetes do. So Odontocetes maybe develop echolocation and for that reason become very different from the Mysticetes, or I don't know, it's just coincidence they develop echolocation after they leave the Mysticetes. The fact that they can echolocate means they really didn't need sight at all to catch their prey, and they can hunt at a much farther down depth than other animals that do rely on sight. Hearing ultrasound is made possible through that lower jaw adaptation, the mandibular foramen filled with fat. And they think that the Squalodon at 25 million years ago, but this one says it's as far back as 33, right? Which is right after 34, right before these guys diverge, or right as they're diverging. So anyway, they think that the Squalodon animal would have been the first to echolocate. The cranium, the head basically, becomes compressed to make room for the melon, as we saw on the last page. And this is where, I wrote down, I don't remember what it was, but the melon is part of the nose, but it is located where we think of the forehead as being. And that makes sense. The blowhole has moved up there as well. So the nose is actually on top of the head as well. And then the rostrum, which is just the front of the head, the rostrum projects outward in the form of a beak in these animals, as you can see. Varieties of toothed whale include the dolphin, the porpoise, sperm whale, beaked whale, and the killer whale. The killer whale is a dolphin type. I found that pretty interesting. And a little picture. The whales of the world. This shows on the left baleen whales, and on the right toothed whales. So if they're facing left, they're toothed. If they're facing right, they're baleen. Baleen ones look bigger, except for, I think that big guy at the top is the sperm whale. And the ones on the right pretty much all look like dolphins, and you can see the killer whale in there as well. We are going to be looking at the humpback whale. That's right. Do whales sing? Okay, but does that really? Are you sure that counts as song? Okay. That sounds like a sing. Let's keep going. Which whales sing and why? At the top there, we have the heart of a blue whale, and you have a little tiny human next to it. That human is actually normal size, so that heart is a lot bigger than the human. Anyway, blue whales are very big. They're the biggest of all whales, I believe, and I think this is correct that they are the biggest animal that has ever lived. So their blue whales are bigger than any dinosaur. I was been trying to imagine like if there was a huge blue whale in downtown Albuquerque, how many streets would it take up? And then if it were making noise and we were underwater, I mean, I know I would be able to hear it from here, but I'm just trying to figure out which frequencies I would hear best and what kinds of sounds it would make. Okay, so most if not all species of whales vocalize. I haven't been able to find someone say all whales vocalize, but at least most of them do, and they vocalize a lot. Odontocetes, the dolphin type, use high frequency sounds, all the way up to 150 kilohertz. So that's close. That's similar to what bats are doing. They use that for echolocation, and then they also communicate with those high frequency sounds. Those sounds are produced by phonic lips. So those phonic lips, as we saw, I can't find my cursor, but the phonic lips there, you can see it in the picture, circled. And these are adapted nasal passages. So maybe you could even imagine like, okay, take your fingers next to your nose there, and should we do this together? So I'm thinking like you go, and then that's not the most beautiful sound in the world. Is this singing? Thank you. I come up with new careers all the time. If I hadn't gone into professoring. And then those sounds, they're amplified by the melon. Maybe that's why, if you couldn't hear some of that, it might be because I haven't yet evolved a melon. A big piece of fat on my forehead. All right, the Mysticetes then are the whale types, as we know, and they use lower sounds, a lot lower. They go infrasonic, all the way down to 8 hertz. I think even maybe 6 hertz in this one recording I was listening to. And the sound, the frequencies can go all the way up to 30 kilohertz, right, which is higher than what we hear. But I have not been able to verify that. Like the recordings I'm using, it may just be because of the technology, but like there's some pretty high sounds, but I was not able to see anything higher than 5 kilohertz, which is basically the top of our piano. So that definitely might be the recordings, but I think a good thing, good rule of thumb is Odontocetes have the dolphin types have really high sounds, and they much of their communication is well above what we can hear. Mysticetes have pretty low sounds, and some of it is lower than what we can hear. They produce these sounds with the larynx. It's a homologue of the vocal folds. They apparently don't have, they don't have exactly vocal folds in the same way that we do, but they have a thing that is homologous to the vocal folds in the larynx, and it does make sound. So you can call that whatever you want. And if you look up the Wikipedia on this, they do say it's that whales don't have vocal folds. But then I read the articles that they're citing, and the article says that like they have a thing that's homologous to the vocal folds and that produces sound. So important is that they do have something like a larynx. So they probably produce sound somewhat in the way we do. They aren't using the nose phonic lips in the way that I just demonstrated for you. And so this would account why Mysticetes have lower sounds in the same range that we do, and Odontocetes have the capacity at least to do like the very, 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 very high sound. They're using different types of organs for them. I think Odontocetes might be able to produce 2 sounds at once, so they probably have a larynx also. All right, and then at least for Mysticetes, probably both of them, exhaling is not necessary during singing. So in the same way that we saw with frogs, that frogs can like cycle air back and forth between the little air sacs. Some birds can do that too. They don't have to breathe in and out to sing. They can basically go up to the water, bring in air, and then push it around inside their bodies, but not out. They don't have to push it through out of the body. So if you're singing underwater, it allows you to save some breath. And then we could talk about, if we're saying, do whales sing? Which whales sing? I've been playing some whale songs as we go, and I did my little nose performance a second ago. Do we call that singing? If I was singing, if that was just with my phonic lips, my flaming, P-H-L-A-M-I-N-G, flaming phonic lips, was that singing? Or was it just like making noise? Was it just vocalizing? How do we decide? We know that the term song could be defined as things that are longer and more complex than other vocalization types. We saw this with the zebra finch. That was a good example of it. A bunch of different individual sounds that they make that are super meaningful. And the song, in a sense, isn't meaningful, but the song sort of uses all those different types of sound, but then sequences them in a fancy aesthetic way. Or you could define song in a different way. You consider how it functions. It's functioning as a display that ends up becoming a kind of object in itself. So I like this idea of display. It comes from J.J. Gibson, who's like a, perception guy, ecological philosopher. I can't remember. Yeah, whatever. He's the guy that came up with the idea of the affordance theory. Just you can see me while I'm talking about this in case, because there's nothing on screen. So affordance theory, like a chair, what is a chair? It's, what's a chair? It's something that affords sitting, but it also affords burning, throwing at someone, propping open a door. What is the meaning of an iron? An iron can, like, obviously iron. I can iron a shirt, but it can also iron hair, and it could be used as a paperweight if you wanted to trace out the shape of it. Okay, it could be lots of different things. So meaning of something has to do with its affordances. So, and then in the book where he's talking about this, he has this idea of a display. So like we think of communication as presenting information, and then most communication has to take place in most animals, has to take place in that particular moment. If I'm not there, I can't communicate to you. It's a little bit different if I leave a scent. A scent is like a display. You can come to it later and say, oh, David, Professor Bashmaner left his scent here for me. And when we leave notes for our housemates or wives or husbands or kids or other people living in our house, I always think of that as a display. It's like, you know, I write it at one point and then I leave it there, and I know that whenever you come, you'll get it. So I think songs in some, if you're thinking of an improvisation is not a display. It exists only in real time. But creating a song is something that maintains content, the same kind of content to some extent across performances of it, across renditions. And it might mutate over time, and whale song does mutate. But this idea of a display is just a cool one. It's the idea that a communicative thing can acquire some timelessness, some consistency of meaning across different performances of the thing. I'm not wrong, right? That's cool. So, and then I call that a meme. You know, that term comes from Richard Dawkins, 1976, The Selfish Gene, the last chapter of that book. Awesome, super awesome read. I was going to make you guys read it, but then I don't know what happened. Something bad. Oh, we had a pandemic. No. Anyway, memes. I'm sure you know what they are, but I gave you one on the next screen. Let's take a look. Krilling me softly with whale song. Look, there's a little microphone that he's singing there. This comes from Jeremy Young, who, believe it or not, has a webpage called The Essential Guide to Songwriting for Whales. And it is really written as if it is for whales. Krill is a kind of food that the whales like to eat. In case you didn't know. In case you don't know what a meme is, I'll just like fill you in on what's cool in whale slang. So let's talk about echolocation in the Odontocetes. We are mostly going to be talking about humpback whale today. I know you're like, oh my God, how long is this video going to be? And I'm like, oh my God, just relax. It's a video. Okay, so echolocation in Odontocetes, which are the dolphin types. You can see at the top right, there's the melon. The phonic lips are in red in that picture. And there is an old dissection photo below that, and you can see how big the melon is there above the jawline, above the eye. Okay, so there's some fascinating things about this, like why the whales would be as vocal as they are. Now, it's weird that fish are not as vocal as other animals, but at least like once animals go up on land and become super vocal and have the capacity to be super vocal once they go back into the water, it seems like all mammals that went back into the water really exploit vocalization in this way. Okay, so let's talk about the relative trade-offs of light versus sound underwater. They are opposite versus above the water. So light does not penetrate well below the ocean's surface. You know, when the light hits the water, it refracts, it goes in different directions. It doesn't go very deep. In comparison, sound travels 5 times more efficiently in water than in air. It's like 4.5, but whatever. 5 times, it goes 5 times farther, and it gets there 5 times faster. So the way we use vision and audition on land would be flipped, in a sense, underwater. Sound is much more accurate, much more powerful, whereas light is like pretty obscure and not very effective. At least for distance. Okay, so now we can talk about why they use echolocation. We saw how it worked in bats, and it is, as far as I can tell, the same thing, dolphins in Odontocetes. The kind of information that's returned by a sound's echo is a function of its frequency. Lower sounds travel farther, but they only echo off of large objects, right? Low sounds have large wavelengths, I'm thinking of this whale that's in downtown Albuquerque, and if it's making really low sounds, those sounds they're going to come all the way and reach my house. They might be blocked a bit by houses, but those houses would have to be big. If its high sounds are going to be blocked by everything in their way, and they also won't travel as far. So I won't be able to hear probably any high sounds from the whale that's in downtown Albuquerque, but the low sounds I'll probably be able to hear. So those higher sounds are more local, but they bounce off smaller objects. So if that whale in downtown Albuquerque was trying to find individual people, it would probably use higher sounds. If it wanted to find individual insects, even higher sounds. If it wants to find where the buildings are, or if it just wants to transmit farther, it can use lower sounds. This is a little GIF, I suppose, from Wikipedia, and I'm calling this how echolocation works. And Wikipedia is just called, I don't know, it doesn't call anything. So you can see the Odontocete there on the right, and it's sending out a pulse of some sort of sound, and then part of that sound is bouncing off the back of the fish, and it comes back at the animal. So the animal hears the echo after the green. So the green pulse goes out, the red pulse comes back, the green pulse comes out. The pacing of the green pulse has to leave space for the return of the red pulse. And then the whale can calculate how much time it takes for the echo to come back, and it knows how far away the thing that's reflecting it is. Okay. So since lower sounds and higher sounds have different functions, right? Lower sounds are going to reflect off big objects. Higher sounds are going to reflect off smaller objects. If you don't know what kind of object is out there, you'll do a frequency sweep that's going to scan all sizes of objects. If you know the object, I don't know that dolphins do this, but we saw with bats, once they know what the object is and they know roughly where it is, they use steady tones so they can tell how fast that object is going relative to how fast they are going. And then the lowest sounds are blocked the least, and they also dissipate the least. So they can, apparently big old whales using really, really low sounds, those sounds might go across the entire world. So you're a composer of whale song or human music, whatever. What do you think your song tells you about your audience? Let's say you don't know how many people in your audience, your eyes are closed, and you start singing, and there's some degree of echo and there's some degree of not echo. Could you tell how many people are in the audience just based on how much echo there is? Something like that. How would you compose a song to tell you the information you want about your audience? Okay. Well, humpback whales, Megaptera novangelicae, are baleen whales. They're mysticetes. They're up to 50 feet long and 30 tons. That's a lot of tons. Because 1 ton is when people talk about 1 ton, they're like, that's a ton. But 30 is 30. That's 30 tons. Okay, females are larger than males. All these animals migrate 16,000 miles a year, right? I think that's a lot of miles. I don't know how many miles there are in the Earth, but it's far. They go all the way up to the Arctic in the summer. When the ice is melting, they get a lot of food there. And then they come down in the winter to breed in the tropics. So the way I remember this, because I always get confused about which way they go where, it's in the US, the older people like to go winter in Florida, and then they come back to wherever they're from in the summer months. Anyway, the whales are doing the same thing. They're wintering in Hawaii and Mexico and places that are closer to the equator. And in the summer, they go up higher into the colder areas in the Arctic. Anyway, they swim massive distances. They basically swim from the top of the globe to the middle of the globe and then back again each year. They eat krill. Krill are, I think they're like shrimp type things, and they eat small fish. And so we're talking about humpbacks specifically, just to point that out. Their courtship behaviors are as follows. Unrelated males might trail females, and females that have a little calf baby with them. The whole trailing thing, I think that is like stalking, which is obviously uncool. They are whales. But anyway, okay, so males then gather in groups, sometimes, around a given female, and they might even fight for the right to mate with a female. And then your group size ebbs and flows as, for instance, defeated males retreat and then others arrive. These are a bunch of behaviors that they show, and I think these are communicative. A lot of these things are fighting type behaviors, but they're not all fighting type behaviors, which I kind of thought they were, but I guess they're not. So I'll show you some pictures on the next screen, but breaching, spy hopping, lob-tailing, tail slapping, pectoral fin slapping, peduncle throws, charging, and parrying. And then mating structure. I bet you want to know, are they monogamous? Are they polygynous, multiple females to one male? Polyandrous, multiple males to one female? Are they promiscuous? They are polyandrous. Individual females have multiple male partners over the course of their lives. So they're definitely not monogamous. It's males might have multiple female partners as well. I think they do. So you would also say that they're poly, but not all at the same time. So they don't have harems, definitely. And the females are much bigger, or at least bigger than the males. So the females do not get bossed around by the males. I find that that's important. And then singing, in particular, is found during the breeding season when they're in the tropical areas. So if you go and check out whales in Hawaii or Mexico or the Caribbean or Japan, right, they are going to be singing in those places. If you went up to the Arctic to watch whales behaving, they're probably going to be vocalizing, but they're not going to be singing, and they're not breeding up there. They're eating. All right, here are these 5 different behaviors. Oh, it's just 2. Okay, so upper left, a female is coming up out of the water. She's breaching, which just means coming up out of the water. And she's got a little calf there next to her. And she's doing this to keep away from males and tell them that she's not interested. The tail slapping thing, also aggressive. And I think, I don't know who does this exactly, but maybe both males and females do it. But yeah, big dramatic tail slap of the fin of the fluke on the water. Down here you have spinner breaching. I think that's kind of aggressive, but I actually don't really remember. You have pectoral slapping, and I think this is something that only humpbacks do among all the whales. And sometimes I think that the article by Lewis Herman that you guys are reading, I think he says that maybe females might be doing that to say that they are interested in certain males, but this is communicative, and I think it can be aggressive as well. And then this guy right in the middle, I didn't have a picture of a humpback doing it, but it is an orca, so dolphin type whale, killer whale, and they're spy hopping. So I think it just means they're sticking their head above the water and looking around, seeing what's up there. Okay. Now, this little picture is from the Catherine Payne article from 2000. And you can see that she is showing a portion of a humpback song. So this is one that they recorded, and I think the whole song is about 12 minutes long, which is a fairly normal duration for their song. So this is just showing a portion of it. This is showing 2 minutes of it, right? 120 seconds. And here it's starting in the middle of theme 4. You then have a switch into theme 5, and then a switch over into theme 6. Then you can ask, like, what is a theme? What's a phrase, subphrase? She's breaking it down. I have this hierarchical taxonomy. Song is composed of several themes, about 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 of them per song. Each theme tends to have multiple phrases. As you can see in theme 5 here, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 different phrases. Each phrase is composed 2 subphrases. So this phrase here has subphrase, subphrase. This one, subphrase, subphrase, then it repeats, right? This phrase has at least one subphrase, blah, blah, blah. Then she has also marked that this subphrase has 3 units in it. This subphrase has, let's say, 16, and they're clearly grouped in 2s. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so number of units per subphrase. And then, of course, so subphrase, and then below the subphrase are the notes or units. Those would be the same thing. And if you're just looking at these little spectrogram tracings, you can see there is some structure here. And then so this is new stuff, starting a new theme. This is 4 different repeats of the same thing, but it kind of mutates a little bit within those 4 repeats. And this one is the previous phrase that has a different pair of subphrases. And what I have found that I think that Payne doesn't really stress is like, see how this subphrase, she talks about it a little bit, but this subphrase is actually very similar to this subphrase, except this one has an extra thing. And these guys are still kind of similar to this. And then finally here, these dots are almost like a continuation of that dot, of these three dots, dot, 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 dot. So as I was analyzing a different humpback song, I started to feel like there aren't as strong changes from one theme to the next as you might expect based on the terminology. Just a reminder to take a break for water. I'm still doing fresh water. Okay, structure in humpback song. Again, this is from the Katie Payne 2000 Progressively Changing Songs of Humpback Whales. Awesome article. So, hierarchical structure. The songs, generally, of humpback whales tend to be between 10 and 20 minutes, with a range of between 5 and 35 minutes. But they're repeated over and over without stop for up to 36 hours. The themes, there tend to be 10 or fewer per song, and they're always in that same order, although you can sometimes omit certain themes if you're a whale. Phrases, repeated within a theme. Number of phrases per theme is the most flexible aspect of humpback song structure. As with bats, the song type is defined according to the presentation of the same materials in the same order, ignoring repetition. That's how you say the whales are singing the same song. Subphrases, I think she's always putting 2 subphrases per theme, and I have no idea if that is just consistent across whales entirely, or it just happens to be the song that she's looking at. And then subphrases, of course, are composed of individual notes, which she also calls units. So with respect to those notes, if you look at the frequency spectrum, it tends to be between 30 hertz and 4,000 hertz, which is exactly the range of the human piano. My piano goes down, all pianos go down to 27.5 hertz is the lowest A, and 4098, something like that, 4,000, about 4,100 hertz. So those are the pitches that we as humans seem to think most of the important information is in, and that is the same for whales. They also do infrasound, but you just don't see infrasound stuff on the spectrum. You end up seeing clicks. So then each of those sounds has a duration between 150 milliseconds, which is 1/6 of a second, and 8 seconds long. The sounds are often pure tones. They could be tone bursts. I don't know what that is, but I think it's when the whale is going like, that's also modulated frequency. So, or ooh, right? Those are modulated contours. The tone bursts, I think, is, like where you get a whole bunch in a row. But frankly, I don't know. Okay, and then what really is just cool is it's not like one whale has one song that it always does. These songs change gradually. They evolve. And all the whales in a given community are singing the same song at the same time, but asynchronously. They're not starting at the same time, but they're overlapping with one another. But then also, what's just crazy is like they end up changing the song in the same ways as each other. It's crazy. So there's 2 types of variation: geographical variation. So you might see, just like we saw with bats, we saw slight differences between how Austin bats and College Station bats were doing, even though they're all the same species, right? So that's like a little regional difference, like Seattle versus Austin, or Seattle versus East Coast versus West Coast. And then you have temporal variation. So within any one individual whale, you record that whale singing the song one year and the next year, and the song will be a little bit different. But there's also, so similarities and differences across different whales, across different regions, but then also across time. And so what are those changes? So the length of individual units can change. The number of units, right, the number of notes in a motive can change. The number of repetitions of a phrase within a theme, and then whether or not a theme is present at all. Now, she's going to give us some examples, then we're going to look at a song by a real humpback. March 13th, 1976, I turned 1 that day of that year. And this whale sang subphrase 1 and subphrase 2, as you see. Okay, and then she looked at that whale the next year and the next year and the next year, all around the same time. And you can see this one subphrase changing from one year to the next. So subphrase 1 there, click, something like that. At first, so I'm going to sing subphrase 1. I don't have recordings of this. That's why we'll listen to a real recording later. But if that's subphrase 1 in 76, then in 77 it's and then in 78 right? It might be different. In 79, there's more space between them. And then in 80, look how much longer they are at the beginning. That's how subphrase 1 changes. So first of all, there's only 2 units in the first year, but then it splits into 4. And then over the course of the next 4 years, the notes get longer and longer. And the distance between the notes, the interval between them, expands. Okay. Now we look at subphrase 2, which is probably something like okay, at the top. So it first increases and then decreases the number of opening elements. So if I look at just the first half of the subphrase, it's and then in 77, and then 78, going a little bit higher in pitch, then 79, and then 80. So it's almost like it gets longer and then has a contour by 1978, and then it goes back again to where it was similarly. And I just, in numbers, I've counted the number of elements. So it starts at 11, then 15, then 21. So it's much longer in the middle, and then goes back to 11, and then goes back down even farther to 9 elements, getting shorter. And in subphrase 2, the second half gradually increases. So if 1976, subphrase 2, it sounds like if we're talking about just the ear. Then in 1977, it's still kind of like ear. And 1978, you get and then 79, and then 80, all right, so adding elements, and then over the course of the entire phrase. By the way, looking back at what I just sang, if you look at the 1980, all the way at the bottom, there's some J's there toward the end, and then some R's, and we're going to talk about that on the next screen. It just means the shape of the thing, which would be going is a J versus is more like an R. Okay, so the whole phrase almost doubles in length. It starts a little bit longer than, it starts at about 15 seconds and ends up probably about 30 or a little bit more seconds. So it's just the phrase itself that's lengthening, irrespective of the theme, how many times it's repeated. What she found, so it's not shown here, but since they're increasing the length of the individual phrase, then these whales ends up reducing the number of repetitions of the phrase within a given theme. So it keeps the whole song roughly the same length. This is a different theme from the same song. This is theme 6. So in what we were looking at was over 5 years. Here, she's looking over 6 months. So this theme just happens to evolve much more rapidly. Or this phrase, yeah, it's a phrase from theme 6. So they're all 1977. We have January, February, March, April, and May of 1977. So this is when I was turning 2. So as I mentioned on the previous screen, there's some R's and J's. You can see this in the upper left. The R just looks like an overslur, and the J looks like an underslur. And, you know, it doesn't matter that if you could recognize this by ear. I mean, the R would sound like more like, whereas J would sound like, The J will sound definitely like an upward sweep, whereas the R will sound like, maybe something like that. Okay, so if we look in 1977, so let's just look over here, 1977, RJJ, RJJ, RJ. Then February is RJJ, RJJJJ. Then next month, RJJJJJ, RJJJJ. So now only 2 R's, 1 and 10 J's. Then R, J, 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 and now all J's. J, 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 J. Cool, right? And this is I think it's one whale. You assume it's one whale. All the whales are singing the same song anyway, so it doesn't matter. So now we can look at that in this chart. And what has happening in this chart is the R's are in white and the J's are in dark. And then this is the year that we're in, 1976 to 1977. And then this would be the following year. So, and then these are months. So this probably starts in December. So anyway, this is probably January, February, March, April, May, and then December of that year. Whatever. But these are months. So in this first month, there's 30% R's and 70% J's in here. In the next month, there's roughly the same thing, still about 30, 70, or 35, 65. Then down to a little bit less than 30, 70, then definitely much less, like 20, 80, and then maybe 10, 90. And by here, you have almost no R's at all. And then in that whole next year, you have 0 R's. So this is really clear demonstration that like there is a process of evolutionary, of change over time, gradual change over time, replacement of R's by J's, gradually decreases to nothing by the second period of the following year, which would be this 2 part. Okay. And let's look at one more of these little things. Then we take a break, and then we listen to some music, whale music. Evolution of subphrase 1 of theme 7, and this is over a 2-year period. So, and this chart looks the same as the previous. There's going to be, these are different periods, different month-long periods of the year. Okay, so in theme 7, you look at the songs from this whole time period, and you chop out theme 7, you chop out subphrase 1 of theme 7, and you group them here. The whole time we're just looking at these things, subphrase 1, so you get to ignore what's on the right there. This looks like, and this looks like, and this looks like, and this like, okay, so those are 4 different possibilities. So we know that the whales during those 2 years sometimes sang the subphrase in any of those 4 different ways, and there are some in-between forms. So she labels these A, B, C, and D, 7A, 7B, 7B, 7D. Okay, and then here there's a version that's in between B and C. So this explains how she's defining this. So A is higher in pitch, it's greater than 900 hertz, whereas all the other ones are lower in pitch. So this is above 900, these are all below 900. Then this has more than 4 units in it. The number N is the number of units here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, something like that. So greater than 4, between 2 and 4, and just 2, right? So a lot about 3 or 4, and then just 2. Right. Okay. And then whether it's stable or whether it's rising. These guys are rising. These are stable. Now, the in-between thing. So there's 2 different versions of that are between B and C. They're both going to be lower, below 900 hertz, but one of them has fewer than 4 elements, but doesn't rise. Fewer than 4 elements, but doesn't rise. So it's kind of like this, not rising. It's halfway between those 2. And then some of them have more than 4 elements, but it does rise. So it's like this, but rising. Or like these, but rising farther with more elements. Anyway, it's just important for reading this chart. So you have all these different variants of this possible phrase. Then what you do is you map them out into the 5 different months of this year, and then 5 different months of this year. And you can again see this gradual change. So here's how it works. Let's take a look. The substitution of, here what we're looking at is not the substitution of units like we saw in the past screens. We saw R's becoming J's. But here we're looking at different ways of singing the same phrase. So think of this like little licks. Like there's a bunch of blues guitarists that are all playing the same blues guitar solo with little licks. And then they eventually replace a whole lick. Instead of just like changing the lick gradually, individual notes within the lick, they sub in a different lick over time. So here are the different possible licks that they have, and then this will show that there is a gradual change. The theme itself is changing over time because of these different possible variants, but then eventually this theme ends up being dropped. So you could say there's a change at the level of the song too, and that the song loses an entire theme. That's not super important. I don't know why I put it there. Okay, so let's look at this first one, this first variant with the okay, and we're going to call that A, and we're going to label it here. So this one was on its way out, it seems. It only appeared 30% of the time in this first month of this year, and then never again. Okay, so then the next one, the lower version of the same idea, we have, looks like 25% of the time it was here, then up to 45% of the time in the next month, but then it is being phased out again here, and then it doesn't come back. A next variant, so I'm skipping over the BC combination, but this one would be C. It's marked with the dark bars here, so in this second period it starts to enter in, then it's dominant here. It's almost entirely the main way everybody is singing it in this month. It's still pretty dominant here. It's still pretty dominant here when they start over in the next season. And then it's about half of the time they're singing it that way. And then still about half the time, and then they just never sing it anymore. The new way of doing it is what's in. And then the new way of doing it is this one down here. And you can see that that starts coming in at the end, very end of the first season. And then it's there a little bit at the beginning of the second season, but then becomes the dominant way of singing it toward the end of that second season. So again, that shows you the evolutionary process. And then, you know, we can throw in this middle stuff, the BC combination thing. You see that here, it's these slash lines. So at the very, remember here they're doing a lot of A, but they're doing a lot of this, and they're doing some B, and then a lot of BC. And then here there's B and BC, and now C, and then B, BC, and then C takes over. So within there, it isn't just you go from B to C, there's even a transition from B to C through this BC combination thing. Again, suggesting that there is fluidity in the elements here that the whales are using to create their themes. One last thing from the Payne article. This is the thing that has always most blown me away. I just love it. So whales use rhyming and what I have called alliteration. Payne didn't use that term, but I think it's a good instance. So when you have more complex songs, it's almost like if there's a greater complexity in sort of like the number of units and how often they're repeated, then the whales find some other way of making them a little bit less complex. And the way they do that is by repeating certain elements. So since each phrase has a beginning subphrase, right, it has two subphrases, beginning subphrase, ending subphrase. Sometimes a subphrase from the phrase of one theme is continued on into the next theme. So as an example here, you have boo, boo, dit, 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 dit. Boo, boo, dit, 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 dit. And then theme 2, boo, boo, near, boo, boo, near, boo, boo, near, boo. Right? So theme 2 is definitely different from theme 1, but they have the same initial subphrase. So if a song is very complex and has a lot of parts, this makes things a little simpler for the whale to remember, presumably. And so that I'd call alliteration because it's the beginning that is the same. And then rhyming is the similar idea, but the second subphrase of the phrase in theme 3 is the one that's going to be there for both parts. So theme 3 might sound like Buret, Buret, Buret. Buret, 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 Buret. Buret, 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 Buret. And then theme 4, and then right, rhyming with how the phrases ended here. Again, rhyming. New beginning, same end. Beautiful. Similarity could be at the beginning, phrase alliteration, or the end. Song structure and evolutionary creativity. How are you guys doing? Sorry, say that again. I'm having trouble hearing you, but I've been listening to whale song all day, so next I'm saying it well. Okay, song structure and evolutionary creativity. The core principle of any evolutionary system is a pairing of blind variation on the one hand and selective retention on the other. In biological evolution, the genes get copied from generation to generation, but mutations occasionally occur, introducing one form of blind variation. I think it's blind because there's not anyone who's choosing which genes to mutate. That is the case of variation at the level of the gene itself. And of course, there is also sexual reproduction as opposed to asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is just cloning of the genome of one parent, whereas sexual reproduction is taking both the genomes and mixing them together randomly. So that actively introduces blind variation at the level of gene combinations and gene complexes. Okay, so though, like evolution in life organisms, everyone except there's very few organisms that don't sexually reproduce. Evolution has worked in a lot of variation in all the organisms that have survived. Okay, over multiple generations. So creativity, then, in any cultural medium also requires both variation and selective retention. Obviously, I'm talking about whale song here, right? I'm talking about human music too. I mean, it's relevant to that, but it's like we're talking about whale song. If we calling it creative, it's got within it some sort of variation and some sort of selective retention. So this is not super important, but people that who talk about creativity as in this way might say that the variation in a creative system, if someone's playing the jazz saxophone or anyway, they're a humpback whale, that creativity isn't blind, it's sighted, meaning they're not randomly choosing which notes to play next or which notes to sing, blah, blah, blah. They sort of know which ones they roughly want to, so they are having their sighted creativity. But that is actually not super important. So we really can make the comparison for right now that creativity and biological evolution are similar sorts of processes. You generate a lot of variation, potential avenues that you might go next. Then you try some of them and you keep certain things that you like. Some selection could occur because a certain variant is actually better in terms of, let's say, the number of offspring that get produced after your saxophone solo, the strength of your social relationships after your saxophone solo, the food you might get because of playing in that certain way, and so on. Or some selection can be arbitrary, at least at first. So let's say with Humpback Whale song, maybe at first, this is the kind of thing that Prum talks about with birds. I'm going to read what's here. However, some selection may be arbitrary at least at first, but then may enter the gene pool of those selecting for the previously arbitrary trait, which then becomes no longer arbitrary and may even trend toward the beautiful in the sense of Prum. So when we have humpback whales, maybe at first they're making random noises with their mouths, but then the people that the other whales that they're mating with say like, oh, I really like it when you make that one random sound. Then their kids grow up tending to like that random sound. Then it's not random anymore because the kids are growing up tending to make that sound and they're also listening for it and tending to like hearing it and wanting to mate with whoever makes that sound. So something that's arbitrary at first and can end up entering the gene pool. What do you call a pot of musical whales? An orchestra. Also, from that same guy, Jeremy Young. Who is he? The essential guide to songwriting for whales? So, by the way, yeah, that was my teapot that was making noise, but it might have sounded like a whale to you. I don't know if you have this thing, but, I get earworms all the time, right? Little tunes that stick in my head. But in working on this class, I now like birds are now earworms for me. Just a little bit annoying. But the whale earworms are so weird. Like I was trying to sleep last night and not able to sleep because the earworms, because I keep thinking I'm hearing whales. Like the heater in my house now sounds like a whale and the teapot now just sounded like a whale. And then there's like a helicopter above my house that's like resonating in the some sort of a pipe. And it just sounds like a whale. All right, this is a famous album. This is the most famous nature album of all time, apparently, Songs of the Humpback Whale. You have listened to or about to listen to a podcast with Roger Payne. If you happen to look this up on Spotify and listen to it, Frank Watlington is the person that comes up as the artist, not Roger Payne. So, I mean, you could just type in Songs of the Humpback Whale, but you just won't see Roger Payne's name on it. I have no idea what's going on, whether that's a thing or not. So, I took one song from it. It's the first one. It's called Solo Whale. I'm going to play it for you at normal speed. We're not going to listen to the whole thing because it's long, but we'll listen to some of it. That's infrasound right there. About 10 hertz. that was phrase 1. Again, here phrase 2 sounds like it's still continuing the same kind of sound, but developing it. Phrase 3. So different, very different texture. But here, continuing the old texture, sort of rhyming. Beautiful. I should be quiet. Okay, so I'm going to pause this. You can listen to it more on your own if you like to. And you could even just like call up this screen in the video and listen along with it, and these time points should be pretty accurate. I did this in Raven Viewer. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is we'll play the whole thing, but I'll do it at double speed, just because I want you to hear that, like later we're going to play it at half speed, but I want you to hear the whole structure of this. So we'll first do it at double speed. So and this is 6 minutes of it. By the way, after this 6 minutes, the whale just starts repeating over from the beginning. It's a little bit different. I mean, it's the same thing, but it's interesting because the pitches are different. So I'm going to, anyway, just means I'm going to do more analysis of this in the future after this video. Double speed. So yeah, it'll take 3 minutes to listen to. I'm not going to do the mouse thing. Just try to follow along. Maybe I'll say when we get to each new phrase. Phrase 2. Second system. Phrase 3. Oh, we're on phrase 4, sorry. I think this is phrase 5. Yeah. About ready to start the repeat. This is the repeat. At the top headphone. This would be phrase 2. Okay, so I'm going to pause it, but as you can see, what you were hearing toward the end there, that was like the second rendition of this. So it's almost note for note. But what I've been looking at it, I mean, listening to it back to back and playing it at the piano, is different pitches. Anyway, I'm very impressed with this whale. I think it's amazing. Okay, so let me just do it at quadruple speed. Whole thing, this will take 1.5 minutes. And I just want you to hear it really starts to sound like birdsong. Starting at the top here. Phrase 2. Second system. Phrase 3. Phrase 4. Phrase 5. Here it goes back to the beginning. Man, it's such a cool transition from phrase 5 back to phrase 1. Okay. So, and now we're going to look at just the very first phrase, and I'm going to show you how you analyze it. This is using the Catherine Payne style of analysis. So, normal speed. So I've got 3 elements that basically group into one subphrase. Actually, you know, I think she would call each of those things it's, I don't know, it's hard to say. I might be doing it a little bit differently than her. I'm building off that again. Okie dokie. Now, it's just so amazing to hear in a half speed, so I really want you to hear it again. Okay. Like I said, pretty awesome, right? We're not going to do double or quadruple speed. Okay, this outro, it says the aquatic ape theory. We're not actually talking about like that, but we will do that later. We're just going to have a screen of summary questions. How different is each performance of the same song by the same whale? So I was even noticing that when the whale repeats its song in this one recording, one whale, the second repeat is not really exactly the same. It's the same enough that it looks very similar on the spectrogram, but it's different enough in that it's different pitches. Are they as internally consistent as this method of analysis makes it look? If I say, okay, that's the return of theme 1, it is kind of important to know if how and to what extent theme 1 is varied when it comes back, or if it's very similar. And as far as I can tell, scientists weirdly think I'm the first music person who's been looking at this. Obviously, George Crumb wrote a piece based on this, but I don't think there's any articles on this. So what I have planned as a result of this presentation, man, I'm so into this whale right now, that yeah, I'm going to do much more in-depth analysis. I have started to write it out all by hand. And just in case you're curious, this is what it looks like. Is that still a whale? I know you can't really see that, but whatever. It fits weirdly on a staff. It feels kind of awesome. There's a couple places where it sounds like it's kind of quarter tony, but I'm just super excited about it. Okay, so, and then how consistent is the song really across different singers? Science says they're singing the same song. They're singing the same song in Mexico versus in Hawaii in the same year, and Japan, right? Like all the humpback whales across the world are pretty much singing the same song in a given season, but then the song is different from year to year. Like nobody knows how they're doing it. Okay, so another question. In the labeling of the repeated segments, is it just the overall gesture that's repeated, or are the notes mostly the same as well? So, I mean, that is what I said above, but so for instance, in the, you know, that thing, is it always, is that note always the same? In my transcription, I'm finding like, oh, that's totally not always the same. And the whale is often stepping up from like A to A to B flat, or back to A and then B and then D and then C sharp and then C. Like the whale is using different bottom notes and then it's changing the top notes. So there, it ends up being like a polyphonic melody against low voice and high voice. I mean, it's pretty awesome. Music analysts have far more specific terms for characterizing types of repeats. So in music, we talk about a motive being the same. So in Beethoven's Fifth, da 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 da, we say that's the motive, but we don't say it's the motive. It just keeps repeating. We say it goes ya da da dum and then da 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 dum. That's on scale degree 5 5 5 3 and 4 4 4 2, or solfege or however you want to think about it. And then la da 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 la da da dum. Those are all functionally different, even though it is the same gesture repeated over and over again. So, and like you're just approaching this as science. Some of the time it might make sense to say, yeah, that is the same thing. Some of the time it might make sense to say, oh, it's different. And so it's not either the same or different, but like how finely tuned do you tune the decision process that says whether it's the same or different? So you have strict repeat, which would be ya da da dum ba 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 bum, and then you have transposed, which is ya da 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 dum. That's a third, but it's transposed down a third. And if you wanted to transpose down by a major third, lun dun dun dun. Oh, sorry. I mean, go down by a second, but whatever. Lun dun dun dun. That's a real transposition as opposed to tonal, right? It follows the exact interval, but not the same scale. And then you have, instead of, so lump bump bump bum versus yet da da da. Like one of them is faster, one of them slower. So augmented versus diminuted. You can have elaborated da 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 dum. Right? The whales are kind of doing all of those things. So do you want to call those things the same or different? I think like working in that level of detail in the decision-making process will be super fascinating. Okay, so, and then rather of thinking of individual motifs simply repeating and ignoring the variance across the repetitions, it might be better to think of in the term that Schoenberg coined to describe the music of Brahms, whom he worshipped, developing variations. So it seems like not only are the repetitions different from time to time, from utterance to utterance, but they're developing in that difference. So I'm not even talking about just across from 1 month to the next or from 1 year to the next, as Catherine Payne is talking about. I'm talking about within whoa, whoa, woo, woo. Sorry, that's not very good. But the whale is taking a motive and then developing it based on the previous development and then continuing to develop it. And then sometimes Dr. Payne will say this is a new theme, but clearly it's a similar motive from before and it's continuing a similar process. It's just kind of convenient to say, let's call this a new theme. So looking at, instead of calling them the same motive, which represents how they're static, how they're the same thing, it would be cool to look at the process of how they are varying over time. So like the low note is rising up and the high note is falling or something like that. And then irrespective of the degree to which Humpback's song is certainly partially a purely aesthetic object, it does have the capacity to map out space in the echolocative sense. As far as I can tell, everybody that I'm reading is saying that Odontocetes do echolocate and the Mysticetes don't. And that may be true in terms of what they can hear and the kinds of sounds they make, but it does seem to me, in listening to especially the slowed down version where you can hear the echoes individually, it seems to me like this song, even though I'm sure it has aesthetic function now, right, in alliance formation and mating choices and stuff like that, I can see how every single one of these sounds would function to map out space in the form of echolocation. So let's look at this just a little bit. This is, by the way, this is the last screen of the presentation, second to last. How can the functional role of a given sound be considered alongside its aesthetic role if you're doing an analysis of whale song, right? Even if that original functional role is considered partially or wholly vestigial, like no longer functional. Okay. So let me just give you a quick little example. So the whale's going, like it's a lot of what it's doing, so much of that time is sweep from low to high. So we know that the sweeping gives you a vast, vast, vast range of frequencies. And we know that the lower frequencies function different from the higher frequencies. So if you just want to scan the space around you, a way of doing that is having a large frequency sweep. The lower things tell you about stuff that is bigger, and the higher frequencies tell you about stuff that is smaller. And we know that the lower sounds travel farther and the higher sounds don't travel as far. Almost everything the whale is doing, it's always going whoa, and then pause, whoa, pause, whoa, pause. So it's got pauses built into a structure. And remember, it doesn't have to like breathe. Maybe it has to swish around the air between its, the things that are blowing the air. But basically, it's making a sound and leaving a pause so that it can hear the response, the echo response. And then, so I think a lot of the sounds that it's making are designed to map out the spatial territory. Who is in the territory around the whale, and then also what that territory is. That is my supposition. And then I think that that may have been one of the original roles of the song. That would make sense why the whale has these different sounds. And then one of the things that Lewis Herman writes that I think is just super fascinating is that somewhere around the I don't know, the Miocene into the Pliocene or whatever, there's some point in time when the climate changes and the whales can't go to the same routes they've always been going, and so they're not meeting in the same places of the earth. They're meeting at different places, so they need to go wherever they're going. They need to announce that they're going there, so they set up these permanent song units where they're all singing, and they're letting whales know from far, 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 far away that there's a big group of them there. And I keep thinking of like Coachella or Lollapalooza or Burning Man or the Rainbow Gathering. Like the Rainbow Gathering in particular is always in a different place. Burning Man's always in the same place, but Burning Man is almost certainly a lek. There's no reason to go there except for, not just breeding, but having fun. There's no food there. There's nothing to do there except just go and be social. So if we think about that with animals, we can think of that as breeding. So that is a lek. The Rainbow Gathering is always in a new place every year, so somebody has to be putting out the signal all the time that this is where the gathering is this year. So that's exactly what the whales would have had to do at that transition point, and maybe they are just still doing that. It's not as functional anymore. It's now aesthetic. But yeah, that's at least a possibility. And then it just brings up questions like when when you go to one of those festivals, there's different tents or different stages, and some of them are considered more central than others. And the music is obviously there to pull people in when there's no one playing on a certain stage at a festival. No one's hanging out at that stage. Yep, things are about to get wet. Thanks, everybody.